Welcome to the Wireless Threat Podcast Series, sponsored by Bastille Networks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is Jon Bundy. How you doing, Jon?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good this week. Excited to be talking about Wi-Fi today. How are you doing?
I'm excited to talk about Wi-Fi as well. It's something that is constantly on my brain. At least once a week, my partner says, "Why is this not working?" But there are many mysteries of Wi-Fi. It's one of those things that's ubiquitous, everybody uses, and like Bluetooth, which I had a blast talking about last time, I'm excited to dig into how it actually works, how attacks against it works. And like our other conversations, this is going to be a bit of a primer, and we're going to build up to the technical stuff and the how the attacks and the hacks work.
Yeah, it's magical. It's all magic.
All right. So in this podcast series, we explore a new class of device. So next couple episodes will be on Wi-Fi. We help you understand the threat, walk through some real life scenarios, and even do some live demos. Ultimately, the goal is to answer the question, should you be worried about this? If you have any devices, threats, or attacks you want us to dissect on this podcast, please let us know in the comments. And this week, basics of Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi goes back a little bit further than I think most people would think, Jon.
Yeah, a little bit further than Bluetooth. So we talked about Bluetooth. That was back in the late 90s. Wi-Fi officially got its start in the late 90s with the first spec, but it started before that in the early 90s. And what drove that? Ethernet. You got all these cables everywhere. How are we going to retrofit Ethernet to everything, right? I heard that NCR, the National Cash Register Corporation, was interested in selling wireless cash registers to deal with this problem. So they were maybe one of the early proponents. But yeah, it's mostly to get around Ethernet. It's always something like that kicks off these new ideas, right? Get rid of the cable, make things easier.
Yeah, and it's built on a lot of existing technologies. And really, Wi-Fi wasn't isolated. You know, we had mobile communications with phones. I think the very early wireless phones had already been around for maybe a decade or more. You know, the bag phones, the car phones, right? We're already seeing it for personal communications at that point. So I think it was inevitable, knowing that we could send data over without wires, that it would spread to computers and would spread to general computing. And we're starting to see devices that were early on. We didn't have laptops. We had portable computers. So you'd unplug the whole computer, pick it up, take it somewhere, but it had to be plugged into mains all the time. Didn't have a battery in it. But very quickly, early 90s, we started to see batteries. People were like, yeah, if I can run this thing without any wires, now that I need the internet is becoming useful, particularly for email, I think, in those early days.
Yeah, and that was kind of enabled by a few things. One of the most interesting things I found is the FCC opened up that 2.4 gigahertz band that Bluetooth and Zigbee and 802.15.11 Wi-Fi uses. And they opened it up because they considered it to be like a garbage band. Why was it a garbage band? Because microwaves operate there. I'm sure everyone's heard about interference from microwaves. Microwaves operate right around that same frequency. And it made the spectrum less desirable, and therefore it got opened up, and now we have access to it. It's just very interesting to me.
Yeah. And then even earlier than that, one of my favorite little trivia things is that Hedy Lamarr, who is an actress back in the 1940s, 1930s, even when we got into World War II, did some inventions. And frequency hopping spread spectrum was one of the things she invented to make it more difficult, I guess, for the bad guys to find and grab your radio transmissions. And much later on, that became useful for Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, GPS, and some other systems.
It's such a cool story. I think it started trying to get 4-player pianos synchronized. And there's also a problem with torpedoes and the radio frequency, being too easy to jam. And they came up with, like you said, this frequency hopping concept out of the music, which she presented, and they're like, no, we can't. But then later with Wi-Fi, they're like, yeah, that's going to work. So that was part of what helped it get started.
And she's doing this on set in between takes, like while making movies.
I feel like I'm underachieving a little,
Yeah, right.
I haven't been in any movies yet, and I haven't invented anything. Oh, well.
Well, it's never too late, Jon.
So with Wi-Fi, they started it back in the 90s, right? First release, 1997, IEEE. They make these great technical specs, all sorts of technical specs. Here we go. 802.11 is released in 97. And what happens? They release hardware and they don't talk to each other. This is
Yeah.
no good. That defeats the purpose. Afterwards, some of the companies got together and formed an alliance. The Wireless Ethernet Compatibility Alliance rolls off the tongue. And they
Yeah.
said, we've got to deal with this interoperability. And they started with developing test suites and focusing on that interoperability right around 99.
And we got the term Wi-Fi, which was partially chosen because people are already familiar with the term hi-fi, which was short for high fidelity, which my grandfather actually owned I think the name of his shop was Hi-Fi House. He sold hi-fi gear. So I appreciated that detail, that
Yeah.
Wi-Fi had its inspirations in hi-fi
And it's funny
audio
how they
gear.
came up with that. You're exactly right. So they come up with this alliance, the wireless Ethernet compatible, and they do marketing like, well, how can we make this more compatible and how can consumers understand it? And they came up with this name Wi-Fi, and it doesn't mean anything. Everyone thinks it means wireless fidelity, but it just sounds like hi-fi and it's cool. And then they
Yeah.
changed their alliance name to the Wi-Fi Alliance after that. And it's still called that, the WFA, the Wi-Fi Alliance. They still do branding and certification, and they're in charge of kind of the marketing, the branding, the interoperability, the security. They take these great specs, these technical specs that come out, they pick and choose the right parts for the consumers. They add some security or invent it if it's missing. They'll roll in other specs and they come up with the brand. And that's how you go from 802.11 dot something to Wi-Fi 7, right? So they translate
Mhm.
and make it all palatable to the consumers and interoperable. They serve a very important role in making sure that these things actually work, not that
Yeah.
they're just technical masterpieces.
Yeah, and it used to be G and then N and then
Yeah,
AC, and we
20
had all
letters.
these letters. And yeah, having to keep up with that was kind of a pain. So it definitely helped that they went to Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 7. So
Yeah.
now we see wireless networking kind of mirror the wireless telecommunications, where we talk about 4G and 5G and
Yeah.
6G.
A lot easier
So
for sure than going, well, I've got an 802.11 AC, but I need
mhm.
BE or is it AX? That's 5, 6, 7. Next one will be 8.
Yeah,
A lot better. So they started 20 some years ago with the OG 802.11, many releases from the Wi-Fi Alliance, many releases from 802.11 working group from the IEEE, and lots of security changes along the way. So there's been a push, not only technology to get faster and faster, move to different frequencies, and to get more reliable. So those are parts of the technical spec. And then there's security things that are happening. And those are almost always driven by vulnerabilities and exploits that happen, which we'll talk about in future episodes.
Mhm. And I think if I were to characterize what we've seen happen with Wi-Fi over the years, I think there's four key things I would call out: speed. So speed increases; it got faster and faster. Capacity. So the ability for like one access point to handle a bunch of devices. Like in the beginnings, it was you had a laptop, maybe two laptops. We didn't even have smartphones when this was new. I think the first big consumer device that came out with Wi-Fi in it was the iBook. The iBook had USB, which was new. Apples of old had proprietary connectors for accessories. And then all of a sudden we had wireless networking with it. So speed, capacity, the ability to add more and more devices, which also included adding more and more bands. So we got 2.4, then we went to 5 because now there were just so many things on the 2.4 network.
Yeah.
Wi-Fi was terrible, and like ordinary people had to go and learn about bands and like switch it to a different band because there were interference, and that didn't work very well. And then security was a big one.
They're all tied together.
Yeah, I
But
feel
yeah,
like capacity, reliability, like the bands, all that kind of goes together. That's how well it works behind the scenes. You don't want people having to log into their Linksys and D-Link and change the channels.
that's part of the Wi-Fi Alliance, trying to make things easier. And in fact, they're the ones that push things like WPS, the
Mhm.
Wi-Fi protected setup, I think it was, where you
Yeah.
could just hit a button on one and go to the other and say, yeah, connect. And you don't have to worry about the password or all of that. So that's outside of the IEEE spec, which is more about how does it technically work to get the best reliability and bandwidth, all of the great science behind it and the physics and the RF. How do they get all that working well? And then the Wi-Fi Alliance, like I said, they put that consumer touch on top of it to make it
Yeah.
easier. They also deal with security, so I'm not going to suggest that they're not holding up that end, but they definitely push the security parts as well. Yeah, so we talked about the OG in 97, and then in 99, the Alliance came up and they're like, this didn't work out. Let's do interoperability. And then B and G come out. So if you remember those, 802.11b was
Yep.
on the 2.4 gigahertz, 802.11a was on the 5 gigahertz. Now, what's the difference between the bands, you might be asking? Well, one's more congested, as you mentioned, 2.4 gigahertz. There's a lot of stuff there. But being a lower frequency, it does tend to have a little more distance. It can penetrate through walls better. So you get better coverage on those. But it is
Yep.
more crowded. There's only really 3 channels in there that people can use without overlapping and colliding. Where when you go to 5 gigahertz, there's more channels. You can spread out more and have your own little slice of that frequency. But the downside is that higher frequency doesn't penetrate walls as well. It doesn't travel as far, but you can also get more speed if you get a good connection.
While you're still on bands, I should mention outside the US, those bands were a little bit different because the FCC did not govern other countries. So you actually got a few extra bands in some parts of the world on
Yeah, the channels
2.4.
in 2.4 gigahertz. You might have seen that.
Or not bands, channels. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, in 2.4 gigahertz in the US, we get 1 through 11. And generally, you set it up to be on channels 1, 6, or 11 because those don't overlap. But in other places, Japan's brought up frequently, they have 12, 13, 14. 14 is just sitting out there a little bit past the end all by itself. But due to regulatory limits, we don't have that here in the US.
Yeah. Some people may remember cordless phones at the time, which I think are largely gone. Like maybe a few people still have them, but those were 2.4, right? Yeah, you've got one. I think 2.4 gigahertz was kind of the end of that line. So,
Everything was in
and
there.
then Bluetooth, which we've talked about, also on 2.4.
Baby monitor, everyone can release products there as long as they don't use up too much of the airtime. So it is definitely crowded. So there's all these trade-offs. The higher frequencies, you get more throughput, less congestion, but you're blocked by the brick walls or your drywall.
Yeah.
So we've got those 2 initial releases. Security-wise, they started with WEP originally. We'll talk about that more in the exploits. But that
Did
was
not go well.
a doomed security, right? And then they addressed that quickly by 2003, say, well, we've got to do something else. They introduced something called WPA and used a draft 802.11 spec from the IEEE. So they pushed that out. That's what WPA is. And then he came out with 802.11g, another 2.4 gigahertz, a little bit faster, I believe.
54, yep, was the maximum.
Megabits per second, right? 802.11, that was a good one. It was 4 or 5 times faster than your 802.11b. Such a big increase in speed, like you're saying, how the speed increases. They push out WPA because it was compatible with the hardware that WEP used. That was kind of what they did. They developed something that worked on the existing hardware to give time to develop new hardware that could run the new spec. So they used a draft spec, but things happened.
And it was a mess, right? Like when WEP was broken, it wasn't like a little bit broken. Like you could crack it with single core basic laptop from the time in like 60 seconds or something like that. You could just download AirCrack, or I forget exactly what tools we were using for it back then, but we cracked it all the time and it was everywhere and the new hardware wasn't ready yet. Some people were limiting MAC addresses. Like there were some other mitigations that people were trying to put in place, but then we quickly learned like we could sniff the MAC address and steal it and pretend we were that. Yeah. And still get past that access control. So it was wild for a little bit. Like Wi-Fi wasn't as spread out as it is today, but it was still a bit of a panic moment because it's not often in the industry that fundamentally the hardware itself is broken and needs to be swapped out and replaced.
Yeah, that algorithm was just no good, no bueno. And then WPA addressed it, but it was 4 or 5 years. By 2004, that spec 802.11i for the WPA that WPA is based on was official, and the Wi-Fi Alliance says, all right, WPA2 now, everything going forward, WPA2 needs new hardware because we're going to change the algorithms, and boom.
And they did not make the same mistakes. WPA2 lasted a long time.
Yeah, it's fairly solid. And we'll talk more about that with the exploits. But yeah, it's been pretty good. There's some flaws here and there, but overall, it's been good spec, right? It's not.
Yeah, like it actually had password requirements, right? WPA2, like you had to have a certain number of characters and it couldn't have the SSID in the password.
That could be like an implementation detail or something. That sounds like something in W.
No, I think that was in the spec. I think they actually had some security requirements in the spec where Like it would just refuse. You could not put the SSID. I don't think that was like a manufacturer level requirement. I think that was in the actual Wi-Fi Alliance spec.
Yeah, that sounds exactly like something they would do to improve security, right? They add that on top of the technical spec and say, all right, well, technically the spec says you only need 8 characters for the password, but in addition to that, you can't use the SSID. So that would be something they would add in and put into their certification testing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you got WPA2 now. By 2006, that's mandatory. By 2009, 211N comes out. That's both 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Pretty cool. You can run it on both bands. It has multiple in, multiple out. So you have more of these streams of data for more throughput. So not only do they have an 802.11 name, like N, then they get a Wi-Fi Alliance name, Wi-Fi 4. But then there's also some things about it, like high throughput, very high throughput. 802.11n came out in 2009. That had both bands. Everybody's using WPA2 now, whether it's personal or enterprise. And when I say personal, that means you use a shared password that everybody uses to log in. That's probably what you use at home. Everybody knows the same password for the network. Where enterprise uses an authentication server in the back end to authenticate users uniquely. Every user gets their own credentials or certificates to authenticate, which is nice. It's a management challenge, but it's good because you can add and remove individual people very easily. Whereas with your personal network, if someone leaves and you're using a shared password, guess what? Everybody has to get a new password, the same new password. So that's the difference between personal and enterprise. And that distinction exists for all of these releases of Wi-Fi, where you have both of those. And I guess the third option would be an open network that doesn't have any of the authentication in there.
Oh, right. Good point.
Right?
Yeah, so we still see those, right?
Yeah, you go to Starbucks, the hotel, the airport, you get the little thing that says your phone will probably say, hey, this isn't secured because you don't log in, you don't give it a password. And what that means is it's probably not encrypted, but we're going to talk about how that can be encrypted in WPA3. So WPA2, we're talking about 802.11n. After that came AC. That was a pretty speedy one. It was broken up into 2 waves because the spec was so big. The WFA decided, man, let's release just some of the features because manufacturers have hardware that can do it, and give them time to develop the hardware to do multi-user, multiple input, multiple output, right? Sounds like fancy stuff going on where they can start splitting up all of these streams of data more ways. So it just needed new hardware. I have an 802.11 AC Wave 2 access point. What's Wave 2? What's going on? The WFA broke it out into 2 different brand releases. And around the second one in 2018, they said, 802.11 AC Wave 2 doesn't roll off the tongue the way we do. Let's start using Wi-Fi 4, 5, 6, 7. And they went back to N and they said, this is now Wi-Fi 4. I was probably a little upset at the time. I'm like, I remember all of these.
Yeah, a lot of people, that rubbed a lot of people wrong because it also kind of covered up some of the details, right?
Yeah. But it makes sense when you think about what they're doing. So they're not taking all the features from the spec, and they are adding new capabilities in. And what they're doing is making consistent for the consumer so things are interoperable. They meet some baseline of security. If you see their certification, you know it's going to do at least these things. And so they just went back to 4. That's kind of also where they cut off. They said everything before 4 is legacy.
Another fun note with 4, with N, when they added the 5 gigahertz, for folks who have ever seen like 2.4 or 5 on the end of an SSID, like you still see this today because it's separate radios. It's actually 2 different Wi-Fi networks, and you can join them separately. So on a lot of devices, you can choose to set up 2.4 separate from 5, which can be useful because if you're sitting really close to the access point, you probably want to use 5 and get that extra speed. But if you know you're a longer distance away, you don't want to chance it. Like you get a more stable connection with that 2.4. So maybe you join a different network if you're in the back bedroom versus if you're in the kitchen of your house.
Right. It's like the eternal struggle. Like, do you name them and manually choose your destiny? Or do you name them the same and let the access point steer you? You trust that it's smart enough to steer you to the right frequency.
So anytime I see 2.4, I kind of think of that as long range. And anytime I see 5, I think of that as faster but short range.
Faster, but you might not have as good of a signal. So it degrades quickly. And before you know it, you're back to slower. It is a challenge. It's probably 2 types of people. One that names separately so you can choose, and one that names them the same. And you're like, let the hardware decide.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't had great luck with letting the hardware decide.
But okay.
Yeah.
So in 2013, 211AC, then Wave 2 around 2016. 2018, they rename everything. 2019, we get 8X, Wi-Fi 6. This one was more about either speed or reliability. They've been tick-tocking a little bit lately, where a release is about speed and the next one's about reliability. I think the next one, 8, is more about reliability again, and really focusing in and fine-tuning these things because they're really fast. I mean, you're exceeding the speed of a gigabit connection at this point if you have a good connection.
But again, like if you actually look at your connection, it'll tell you which of these specs you're using at any given time and what speed you're going. And you'll often find, unless you're right next to the router, you're probably not hitting those top speeds. Because of all kinds of different factors, you'll find your radio actually negotiates down to just what's more reliable for your distance, the amount of brick walls between you and the router, all these different things.
Exactly right. And the vendors have their own proprietary algorithms to figure that out. And they dynamically adjust it. You know, if you start to lose too many packets or have too many retransmits, they might go, maybe I should slow down a little bit so we have a little more reliable connection. Wi-Fi 6 came out, more speed, more reliability. And then 6E, 2021. That's a big milestone release because this is where we jump to the 6 gigahertz band. So just like when you go to 5 gigahertz, less range, but more throughput, 6 is more the same. You get even more throughput, but more easily blocked by building materials. So if you have a great connection, good line of sight, you could really fly. Then most recently in 2024, Wi-Fi 7. The big thing there, which is kind of interesting, they added something called multi-link operation, which said, you know what? We're going to use all 3 bands at once. We're just going to go crazy. You're going to get all the speed from 6. You're going to get all the speed from 5. You've got to have a good, strong back-end connection to use all that, but very interesting. And that's where we are with 8 coming out probably in 2028 with reliability improvements. What I didn't talk about was security. We talked about WPA2 way back in 2006. It was WPA2. I know it's mandatory with Wi-Fi 7. So that was released recently. It is mandatory for at least Wi-Fi 7, if not 6E. And so what does that mean? Well, they completely changed how you authenticate, or really it's about how the keys are exchanged. So one downside is that you can observe a handshake and the random numbers that are used and see the results. And then you can go back and say, I wonder what input I need to get that same outputs that they got. And if you can figure out the right input, you figured out the pre-shared key. If you go through the same algorithms, so you could do what's called a dictionary attack and try all the different possible passwords. And it gets pretty fast with GPUs now. And you could try to crack that. So there's some flaw there. It's vulnerable to a dictionary attack, which is why you've probably seen advice to set your password to not a dictionary word, have numbers and symbols. And it's important because someone could try to guess a password, see if they got the right one over and over very quickly to get that password. And WPA3 kind of addresses that because they change how they do that key exchange in crypto to make it a little more secure, which is great. The other thing WPA3 added is for open networks, they now give you the opportunity to still have encryption. So even though you're not typing in a password or using your credentials to log in an open system, you could still connect and have the opportunity to do it as this same key exchange. It's a Diffie-Hellman elliptical curve cryptography key exchange, or Diffie-Hellman key exchange, that gives you secure keys between each other that's going to be very difficult for an attacker to guess or capture and break to decrypt your traffic. So you can have encrypted traffic on an open network, which is fantastic. But your equipment has to support WPA3. And so people don't always turn it on because of compatibility.
Yeah. So on that note, I wanted to mention that because I'm looking at my settings. I could have WPA3 enabled. And then I'm remembering all the ancient stuff that I still have.
All your IoT stuff, right? It doesn't support it. So I have a different network. I have one good network, WPA3 only. And you don't want to use the transition mode where both are there because then it's just like having WPA2. And so on that one, I do WPA3, and on other ones, I do WPA2, and I try to segment that traffic as much as I can. But there's always these trade-offs that maybe consumers don't want to get into. They just want it to work.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know if those IoT devices are going to ever have that.
And yeah, just making this stuff work has been a lot harder than I think most people expected. But yeah, just the reliability of it. And I often see like even very technical people, who swear, oh, I've got gig up, gig down, I got fiber. I guarantee you every single time it's something wrong with the Wi Fi configuration. And even on Ubiquity, I've had to play with the settings so much because there's more
Yeah.
IEEE standards for when I go from downstairs to upstairs. I don't want to keep using the access point downstairs. I want to be handed off to the one
Yeah.
upstairs. And the roaming standards and handoff standards sometimes aren't implemented very well or don't work very well. So like on mine, I've got it disabled. And I can't remember why I disabled it, but at some
I
point,
can tell you, right?
yeah.
Because I had the same problem recently. I wanted to use my printer. It won't connect to the Wi-Fi. I look, and this old printer probably doesn't understand roaming. And if you have that enabled, it might not be able to connect. So I'm like, all right, you get to go on the crappy old IoT network where everybody lives on 2.4, WPA2. But I had to disable roaming because, like you said,
Mhm.
there's all these things. Is it
I,
compatible? Is it not compatible?
I have wireless bridges for things because they didn't have Wi-Fi. There's like an Ethernet to Wi-Fi bridge device you can buy, and it thinks it's talking Ethernet to the network, but it's plugged into a device that then
Mhm.
connects to the Wi-Fi for you, and so you can put really ancient stuff on your
Yeah,
network as long as it has Ethernet, as long as it has something that you can convert to wireless. It
sure.
sucks collecting old things and having a passion for old technology and trying to have a functional network at the same time. They don't go
It's
together
tough.
very well. And you mentioned Wi-Fi Direct, which is a good point too. When you connect to your car over Apple CarPlay or Android Auto,
Mhm.
Bluetooth doesn't have enough bandwidth to mirror your screen to the car's infotainment or high fidelity audio. It actually connects to the car's Wi-Fi. The car stands up a Wi-Fi access point. And you're talking about your printer's Wi-Fi Direct. It's when a device basically has its own access point built in, kind of like a hotspot on your phone, and you just connect directly to it. So we
Yeah,
see that
it's kind of
happening
like
a
that,
lot with devices too. Yeah.
but it's its own spec, which is cool. So it
Is it?
has its
Okay.
own.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, Wi-Fi Direct is a specific flavor of peer-to-peer Wi-Fi. Like peer-to-peer
Hmm.
just means there's no access point involved. But
Right.
in this case, one of them acts as an access point, and it sends
Right.
beacons just like an access point.
It
But
sets
it's
the
called a group owner.
SSID. Mhm.
Yeah, so it still has a lot of the same things, but there's just different mechanisms because you don't have the same infrastructure. But the WFA actually did come up with that spec and implement it. The other options are to stand up a soft AP, which means your device says, hey, I'm an AP. And it does most of the functionality that an access point would do, including authenticating clients and routing to other clients. And actually, if you remember those smart glasses we were talking about a few episodes ago, they are big users of peer to peer Wi Fi. And interestingly enough, on Android, either the glasses or the phone will be that group owner and stand up a Wi Fi direct network that they connect to, and then they share the media because it's faster than Bluetooth. But on iOS, Apple has decided not to implement the Wi Fi direct standard. So instead, the app on an Apple phone will say, hey, glasses, go ahead and stand up that access point, and then I will connect.
Yeah, I have to manually hit join to be able to
Yeah,
get
you have to
videos and
manually hit
photos
join.
off of my Meta glasses. Yep.
Exactly right. So what happens is your Meta glasses say they go, I'm an access point now, and it starts sending out beacons. And then your
Mhm.
iPhone already knows what it's called, and it goes and finds it, and then they connect, and then the two of them just shuffle the media over that fast connection.
So it sounds like the next spec of Wi-Fi is going to focus more on reliability. I think, which is understandable. It's almost like just part of our culture now to complain about Wi-Fi, to complain about the Wi-Fi not working.
Yeah,
And people have had complaints about Bluetooth, but I've always found it interesting that we've never had to get to the same level of fiddling with Bluetooth. Maybe because the demands of Bluetooth are less. Like the manufacturer says, look, you got to be within 30 feet or it doesn't work. It's not, Bluetooth has never been ambitious enough to try and work across an entire house.
yeah,
But yeah, it's good to see them because it's plenty fast enough now, right? Like
right.
I don't need Wi-Fi going 5 times faster than my internet connection. So I'm glad they're focusing on reliability. I would like to see more of it automated, less of me going in and having to check and uncheck boxes and
Yes,
try it
for
out for a
sure.
day. Yeah, less
Yeah.
troubleshooting. Anything else we should cover, John, before we wrap up this episode?
I think one thing good to know is just a little bit more about how it works. That's going to set up some of the knowledge you need for why some of these exploits happen. And so Wi-Fi, you've got packets flying around. It's just like sound, you and I talking. We've got to share the airspace. How do they do it? So there's ways to do that. And there's 3 different frame types that are used in Wi-Fi in general to kind of manage this whole process of managing the airtime and the networks and the communication. So 3 frame types. This is what I want people to remember. There's management frames, which are used to set up and maintain a connection. So these are things like a beacon from an access point that says, I'm on a network, here I am. Probe requests from devices saying, tell me more about yourself. Probe responses, giving that information back. Authentication and association, which is its own confusing little thing. But think about authentication as being your device's, hey, access point, I want to talk to you. I speak 802.11, and the access point says, cool, we're talking. You've just been authenticated. You don't actually prove who you are in the typical authentication, but that's the first step of joining a network. And then the next step is association. The device says, hey, access point, I'd like to join your network. I'd like to associate. And then the access point usually says, sure, okay. So far, so good. The next part is the actual authentication and key exchange, and it depends on what kind of network you're on.
Yeah.
Other things, controlling the traffic. I remember I said there's airtime. How do you control it? There's things that say, I'd like to send some data for a little bit. Please, everyone, don't transmit for X amount of time while I go. And then the access point will say, you're cleared to send. So request to send, clear to send. The interesting thing about these is they're not encrypted. I want you to remember that.
Oh, really?
You haven't joined the network yet, so you don't have a key. Not only that, but some of them, like the request to send, you want everybody to hear this so that they can not transmit, right? If you say, I'd like to send a big block of data, I don't want to waste my shot and just send it and get interrupted. I want to say, hey, I want to say something. Is that okay? And then everybody says, okay, I'll wait 10 seconds or whatever. And then you send it. So everybody has to be able to understand and read that without encryption, which means you can spoof them. Attackers can send them and play around. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Management frames, not encrypted, control how you get on. Right?
Foreshadowing.
Or done. Control frames, that's more about what I just talked about, the request to send. So you're already connected. Those are not encrypted, like I said, because you want everybody to hear them. And then the third type is data. That's what we think of. That's what we want to do, is send data and receive data. But in order to do it, you need management so you can join the network. You need control so that you can have a reliable flow of data and control that airtime. Those management and control ones, often not encrypted. Some of them can be. And the data is usually encrypted, and that's protected. I think that is at a high level what's going on there.
Yeah, just looking at my Ubiquiti, I noticed that my average transmission retries on my 2.4 gigahertz network is 35 or over 35.
Somewhere.
So yeah, just like the internet, it'll retransmit, retry if stuff doesn't make it.
Yep, and that's a good measure too, or that's one of your fundamental metrics. See if your network's okay, right? How many retransmits are there? All right to have some. Like I said earlier, some of the algorithms will use that and other metrics like your signal strength to decide when to roam or when to slow down your connection so you get a more reliable connection. It's normal, but it's a good health metric.
Yeah, this is great. I think we've set ourselves up for the next episode. Like I teased before, we're going to talk about whether or not public Wi-Fi is safe to connect to, how some of these different attacks work, and what you should be worried about in general with Wi-Fi. All right. Thanks again, John, for joining me. Looking forward to the next episode. And thanks to Bastille for sponsoring this series. You can check out bastille.net/blog for more information on wireless threats. And don't forget to leave a comment with what you'd like to see us discuss next. See you next time.